Tonight on Conversations, Mike Huckabee sits down with Vice President Mike Pence to discuss faith, family, and politics. This special edition of Conversations with Vice President Mike Pence starts now.
Welcome to Conversations. Our focus is the 48th Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence. Now, before we get started, a little background on the Vice President. Born in the town of Columbus, Indiana, he's a law school graduate, and near and dear to my own heart, he hosted a radio and a television show, noting that his beliefs and style of communications made him a Rush Limbaugh on decaf. He's also a former U.S. Congressman from Indiana, as well as the 50th governor of the Hoosier State. Vice President Pence has described himself as a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican, in that order. Recently, he visited my weekly show for an in-depth conversation. So let's take it from the top as he enters the studio to meet our audience. Mr. Vice President, I'd say the Mike Pence fan club has assembled in Nashville today. What a welcome they're giving you, but you know what? It's deserved. We're so happy to have you here. Thank you for coming to join us in our house.
Well, thank you, Governor. Great to be on Huckabee, and great to be in Tennessee.
Can I tell people that this show is a great example of a promise made, promise kept. Ran into you at a White House dinner. You said, love to come back and do your show, because we did it once taped in the White House. Okay. And I said, great, we'll come up and do it. You said, no, I want to do it in Nashville with you there. And I thought, yeah, right. Here you are. This is a guy who keeps his promise. You have been on an unbelievable travel schedule. I get I guess the press release every day of where you're going to be. And I think most people would get tired reading it, much less living it. But you're all over the country in places like Tennessee and Iowa, all over the upper Midwest, throughout the country, talking to Americans about trade agreements, talking to them about the economy. How many of them come up to you and say, Mr. Vice President, I want to talk about impeachment? How many of them say that?
For literally 2.5 years, Democrats have been doing their level best to tear down this president, tear down this administration. You know, for more than 2 years, it was all about Russia collusion, until the Justice Department found no collusion, no obstruction, case closed. 2 weeks ago, they were talking about impeaching Justice Brett Kavanaugh after slanderous accusations of a year ago during his impeachment hearings. And then, of course, we all saw, before she had all the facts, Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced an impeachment inquiry, and I think the American people are saying enough is enough. We want a Congress to work on the issues that matter to the American people. And it's all about jobs, it's all about security, and this president and I are absolutely determined we're going to continue fighting for all the things that the American people elected us to advance. I mean, think about it, Mike. I mean, thanks to President Trump's leadership, we've rebuilt our military. We've restored the arsenal of democracy. We've revived the American economy. As of last week, unemployment now is at a 51-year low. There's more Americans working today than ever before in the history of this country. And at last count, 153 conservatives appointed to our federal courts at every level, including 2 Supreme Court justices.
That's a generational change. That's going to be something that long after this administration is in the history books. The impact of constitutionally consistent justices and judges. That's going to be a legacy that this administration will have.
It really is. And you talk about promises made, promises kept. You know, as a candidate, President Trump said that he was going to appoint conservatives to our federal courts in the model of the late and great Justice Antonin Scalia, and he's done just that. I can tell you, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, Justice Neil Gorsuch, and the more than 150 men and women, I promise you, they're all going to be men and women who stand for all the God-given liberties enshrined in our Constitution, the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, and the right to keep and bear arms.
Yeah. Well,
that's the story. That's when I've been traveling across the country. We've got a great opportunity. The president's negotiated the largest trade deal in American history. And we've been traveling all across the country talking about what we've accomplished over the last 2.5 years. And to your point earlier, the contrast of that with what the Democrats in Congress have been doing, I think is very frustrating to millions of Americans.
And I think that's the point. You're out there talking to people outside of the bubble of D.C.
Yeah.
You're getting the response that you're seeing here in this studio and other places where you're speaking and meeting with people. There is a real disconnect, Mr. Vice President, between what's happening in Washington and what happens around the dinner table of American families night after night. What will it take to get Washington to wake up and say, you know, we would be better off if we were working on our infrastructure, closing the southern border and doing something responsible and getting the United States-Mexican-Canadian trade agreement passed? Right? What is it going to take to get them to understand that?
Well, it's what it always takes with Washington, D.C., and that is the voice of the American people.
An election.
Well,
even before, huh?
Even before the election. You know, I've been traveling around the country talking about the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, which it's not just the largest trade deal in American history, but it comes at a time that the president has demonstrated an ability to negotiate a trade deal that puts American businesses, American workers, American farmers first. And yet here it sits on Speaker Pelosi's desk in what we call the do-nothing Democrats in Congress. All the while they're spending on their latest accusations and their latest controversy. And the American people, we think that when the USMCA is passed, we think it'll create 175,000 good-paying jobs all across this country. And it's time for Congress to act. And we're going to keep pushing for them to do it.
And one of the things that I don't understand, this would be of great value to Democrats as well as Republicans. I mean, this is an American thing. It's not just that Republicans will be better off. Democrats hated NAFTA. The unions hated NAFTA.
Right.
USMCA really takes care of the things they didn't like and puts in a really good trade agreement that Republicans like, Democrats should like. Why aren't they putting this on the front burner and getting this done?
Well, it is one of the ironic things that Democrats are sitting by doing nothing while we have an opportunity to greatly improve on our trading relationship with Canada and Mexico after decades where they were all critical of NAFTA. And frankly, in so many ways, rightly so. You know, long ago, this president, as a private citizen, was talking about what NAFTA would do to hurt our economy. And we've literally seen tens of thousands of factories that closed since the 1990s when NAFTA was signed into effect. If memory serves, Governor, you were out there talking about what NAFTA had done to hurt the American economy early in your career, and I want to commend you for that.
Thank you.
It was visionary at the time.
Got me in a lot of trouble.
And you were right. President Trump was right. You were right. And the truth is that the president rolled his sleeves up. I was in on a lot of these discussions. He drove a really hard bargain with the Canadians and the Mexicans and got a deal that really puts the American economy and the American worker first. But because of their obsession with trying to impeach this president, Democrats continue to let the USMCA languish on Speaker Pelosi's desk. But I'm absolutely convinced if the American people let their voice be heard, if they contact members of the House and Senate and say, we want the USMCA, we'll get the USMCA done this year, and it'll be a win for the American people.
It really would be. I want to turn the corner to something that happened the other day in the White House. I saw a video that was so moving. It was a young lady who had come to the United States at the age of 11 from Ethiopia, having been adopted after being abandoned by her parents. She was at the White House. I saw you standing right behind her and the president. And in a spontaneous and most amazing moment, she called everyone in that room to have prayer for the president. I got to be honest with you. I mean, I teared up watching this because she's not a professional prayer. You know, she's not somebody who makes her living doing religious stuff. This is just a young lady who knows what freedom has meant to her, having come here from Ethiopia and being adopted by American parents who raised her and loved her, gave her not only a life, but gave her faith. And she just felt overwhelmed to say, let's pray for this president.
Yeah.
Tell me about that event, because you were standing right beside her when that happened. I just have to believe it was a powerful moment.
It was a very powerful moment. It was a special night. We had young African-American leaders who'd coming in from all over the country who are excited about what this president is doing for the country and for their community. You remember back during the campaign when the president said memorably to African Americans, what the heck do you have to lose?
Yeah, give me a chance.
And I have to tell you, when you look today, more than 8,000 opportunity zones that are creating an incentive for investment in some of our cities that have been struggling. We passed criminal justice reform that brings renewed hope to people that have been caught up in an incarceration system. And finally, African-American unemployment is the lowest level ever recorded in the history of this country, and the room was filled with excitement about that. And at the tail end, these young people were responding to the president's leadership, seeing that this is a president, like on election night, or I should say early the next morning, when the president addressed the nation after he became president-elect. Remember, he said his ambition was to be president of all of the people of this country. And I can tell you that the fact that we've seen this economy grow, it's working for every American again, you could sense the enthusiasm in the room. And it was a good program, but to your point, at the very end, a young lady who was just down on the rope line shouted to the president that we ought to close the meeting in prayer. And one thing that's true about President Donald Trump, he never hesitates to take an opportunity for prayer, and he invited that young lady up, and we had the most beautiful prayer for the nation, and I could tell the president was moved. I was deeply moved. I'm someone who truly believes it's always been true that the effective and fervent prayer of a righteous people availeth much, and that was a special prayer.
It was a beautiful, beautiful scene, and it was obviously not rehearsed, not planned. It was a spontaneous moment, and it was just magic. Vice President Pence, as well as President Donald Trump, are committed to keeping the economy growing and negotiating trade terms that favor the United States. Hopefully, this will continue to add jobs to our labor market in 2020 and beyond. When we return, we're going to ask Vice President Mike Pence more personal questions, and we'll learn what helped shape him and what composes his personal life and beliefs. Welcome back to Conversations. Chuck Colson was a powerful advocate for faith, and he saw government as something that depended on moral authority that came from above, not just from legislators. He was also a bit of a prophet when it came to tolerance. Consider this comment from him, and I quote, "This idea that it's intolerant to object to anyone else's position, however, is a complete perversion of the historic understanding of tolerance, which was that one had to have the respect to listen to anyone else's point of view, even one with which one might profoundly disagree. Tolerance did not reject truth claims, it respected them." End quote. It reads like he saw what we would face today and he wanted to sound an alarm to people on the left and on the right. Now, why do I share this quote? Because we all desperately need to hear it. And because Chuck Colson played a role in shaping Vice President Mike Pence. Let's return to the interview for more. I think a lot of people, they know you're the vice president, they knew you as a governor and a congressman, but there's some pretty cool stories about Mike Pence that I want us to get into. One is Charles Colson's influence on your life, because I thought he was one of the greatest human beings, one of the most brilliant human beings I'd ever been around, and I know he meant a lot to you. Why?
Well, I had the chance when I served in the Congress to get to know Chuck Colson. You know, like so many other Christians around the country, I'd been deeply moved by his writings and his clarion voice in the life of the nation. But when I was leading conservatives in the House of Representatives, he, like he did with, I think, many people over the course of his life, he kind of took me under wing and was a mentor and a friend. And I can tell you that his work in the prison fellowship ministry, but his keen insight about the nation still influences me to this day. I don't go too long without taking the time to dust off some of his writings and read a little bit.
Wouldn't he be proud today of the
Colson.
First Step initiative that you worked on, that the president signed and worked so hard to get done in a bipartisan? I mean, when you can bring people as far apart as Van Jones and you know, anyone to the right, anyone, and get them together and have them in the same room celebrating a piece of legislation, it's pretty significant. And I think a lot of that, the spiritual maybe inspiration for that, goes all the way back to Chuck Colson.
I really believe it does. I mean, look, we want America to be the worst place in the world for someone to commit a serious crime. But we also want America to be the best place in the world after you've done your time to get a second chance.
Well said.
Chuck Colson was someone who believed in second chances.
Yeah.
And with the First Step Act, that would not have happened without President Trump's leadership. I mean, he literally brought together Democrats and Republicans and brought together leaders in the law enforcement community and crafted legislation that was a great contribution to the life of the nation and to our system of justice. But Chuck Colson, I have no doubt, impacted that. And another thing that he and I worked on that doesn't get talked about enough was when President Bush took the steps that he took to deal with the AIDS pandemic in Africa. Chuck Colson was there, working with many of us in Congress to craft an agreement, to craft funding that staved off what would have been a human catastrophe of AIDS in Africa. And it's something every American should be proud of. The PEPFAR program has saved tens of thousands of lives in Africa, and it represents the best of our country.
I totally agree, 100%. There's a gentleman in your past named J.M. Curtis, a history professor you had in college. My understanding is he had a big influence on you in helping to shape your views of government and what it should be, what it shouldn't be. How did he impact you and why?
You know, I was actually active in Democrat Party politics when I was in high school. And I took that party affiliation off to college with me. In fact, I was the Youth Democrat Party coordinator in Bartholomew County, Indiana. Kind of a community organizer.
I'm sure they still have plaques up about that now.
But I went off to college, and Dr. Curtis, who is still a friend to this day, really challenged me. He challenged me to think fresh about what it was I was raised to believe. You know, my grandfather immigrated to this country from Ireland. My dad built a small gas station business, was a combat veteran in Korea. And he began to speak to me about the vision of the American founding. And the more I listened to him and the more I listened to my second favorite president, Ronald Reagan, the more I realized I was a Republican.
Mr. Vice President, I think you're the only guy I know that went to college a Democrat and came out a Republican. Usually it's the other way around. J.M. Curtis must be one very effective college professor. And I want to say we're grateful to him for having helped shape you, because you've been a conservative leader, both as a member of Congress and as a governor. Your policies reflected a clarion understanding that the best government is the less government. and the best government is the most local government. Washington doesn't necessarily embrace that, but you never have left that ideology that you had when you were starting out at Indiana.
Well, that professor you talked about was a constitutional historian, and really ignited in me a passion for the Constitution of the United States. You know, sometimes when I'm working a rope line, kids will ask me to sign a copy of the Constitution. I say, if I sign it, you got to read it. Because it's an extraordinary document, not only the most successful republic in the history of mankind, but it is a document of a limited federal government that enshrines in the Bill of Rights our God-given liberties. But all throughout, to your point, the 10th Amendment of the Constitution essentially reaffirmed everything that was in the Constitution, that it's so important to remember that it was states that created the federal government. And when the Constitution was formed, they wanted it to be clear that there were certain duties we wanted the federal government to advance, to provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, but that those things that were not specifically given to the federal government were reserved to the states. You've been a governor, I've been a governor, and I can tell you that the American people have a president who believes in federalism today, and it's that philosophy of government, I think, that has inspired my life, and I can tell you that it animates the philosophy of this president and this administration every day.
You've shown an enormous level of personal leadership, something you got scorned for, but that is that you're very dedicated to your lovely wife, Karen, the Second Lady of the United States, and you just have said that you don't go and have moments with women that are not your wife without your wife present. And there were people that thought, oh, that's so old-fashioned, that's so nutty, can't believe somebody would actually do that. And then the Me Too movement came around, and everybody said, Mike Pence is a genius. He's the only guy in America that has nobody who can ever say something about his fidelity to his spouse. You know, that was pretty powerful, yet you were criticized for it until people started realizing that you had been protective of your marriage in a way that other people probably wished they had.
Well, thank you, Mike. I'm humbled by that. Let me say, other than my decision to put my faith in Christ, the second best decision I ever made was when I asked Karen Whitaker to be my wife. She's an amazing person.
She is an amazing person. I agree with that.
She's an amazing second lady. She's just got such a heart for military families. She's traveling all over the country supporting military spouses. But yeah, it was, I got to tell you, the things that you get criticized for in public life sometimes surprise you. That one did. I think I'd mentioned in an interview 15 years ago that a promise my wife and I had made is that I would never dine alone with a woman not my wife. But I have to tell you, we're coming up on about 35 years of
You better get that
marriage,
number right.
And,
you'll be eating alone a lot if you don't.
I think you're right. And greatest blessing in my life is having Karen Pence as my wife. It really is true.
Well, she is a delightful person. And you guys have some wonderful children, one of whom is a Marine.
Well, thank you. Yeah, our son Michael is a United States Marine captain, and he's an aviator. Married to his wonderful wife, Sarah, who is an incredible woman, a great military spouse. And my two daughters, believe it or not, I don't know if you knew this, but my two daughters are both engaged now.
Did not know that.
Our one daughter is finishing law school and will get married soon. And our other daughter just got engaged to a Navy pilot. So we'll be a two military family.
If you've got two weddings coming up with two daughters, we're going to have to raise the pay of the vice president because it's not enough. There's going to have to be an act of Congress going on.
Incredibly exciting. You know, I think, you know, I always used to hear people say, people that were older than me, that they took more pride in what their children were accomplishing than anything they'd ever done. I thought that was just something people said. But it's so true. You know, with your incredible daughter, Sarah, and everything she's done.
Thank you.
I mean, You and I have been blessed to have a lot of opportunities in our lives, Mike, and but I take so much more satisfaction in seeing my children succeeding and living their dreams, and so thanks for mentioning them.
Well, I'm really wanting to let people know the Mike Pence that maybe they don't know. They see the vice president, but that guy who was influenced in college, been faithful to his wife, has raised remarkable children, and is an amateur cartoonist. the part of your biography,
well,
I got to admit,
amateur.
Excuse me. Okay. So he's a professional cartoonist. It just happens to be the people. So how often do you do this stuff? Do you do cartoons regularly?
I did a cartoon strip when I was in high school, and then I did one in college. I did one in law school, and in fact, I was just over at wonderful business here in Nashville, Tyson. They had me sign a sign, and I drew a caricature on that. I like doing that kind of thing.
Given all the editorial cartoons that hammer the president and you, don't you think you ought to do some and go back at him and just...
Not a bad idea. I like what Abraham Lincoln said about the job he had and the jobs at this level. That he said it's important to take your job seriously, but don't take yourself too seriously. And so we keep a sense of humor in the midst of all of it. And I have to tell you, one of the things that's the greatest source of encouragement to me is the relationship I've been able to forge with this president. I mean, some people think we're a little bit different.
Really? I haven't noticed that.
And we are, I'm small town, he's big city, I'm Midwest, he's New York. He's bigger than life, charismatic. I'm not, right? But we've really forged a great friendship, and the enthusiasm that he brings to the job every day, the determination that he brings to the job every day, it's a great source of inspiration to me, and it's an incredible privilege to me to be Vice President to President Donald Trump.
Well, I want to tell you this, Mr. Vice President. I think we're lucky to have this president at this point in time, but I think this president is very fortunate to have you. You guys make a great team, and we're very honored that you're here to share with us. Thank you so very much. One more thing I appreciate about Vice President Mike Pence is something he's communicated on several occasions. He said, "I'm a conservative, but I'm not in a bad mood about it. Let's be cheerful partisans and happy warriors." That's a piece of advice I think conservatives and liberals can take that sure would make Washington a more positive and effective place of government. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this edition of Conversations. I'm Mike Huckabee, and I look forward to seeing you again real soon.